All right, so previously we talked about mitosis, and now we're going to talk about a different cellular process called meiosis. And the purpose of meiosis is specifically to prepare cells for sexual reproduction. So, first, a couple of quick definitions. Asexual reproduction is what we call it when you have a single parent making an offspring that's identical to that cell. So mitosis is a form of asexual reproduction. Your skin cells make more skin cells that are exactly like them. Bacteria going through binary fission would also be asexual reproduction. Also, the term clone, if you hear that term, we use it in different ways in society, but in like specific definition, it's just a group of individuals that are genetically identical and they came from the same parent. And then sexual reproduction must involve two parents. So an offspring produced from sexual reproduction is going to be a combination of two parents as opposed to asexual reproduction where they're identical to one parent. Now, asexual reproduction we think came about first in simple single-celled organisms. Why would asexual reproduction be a benefit? Why is it still around? Well, the most obvious benefit to asexual reproduction is you don't need a partner. Asexual reproduction can happen very quickly, and you're just going to make cells that are identical to the cell that you started with. As well as the fact that asexual reproduction is going to make organisms that are identical in their traits to the parent. So if you've got a gene combination that's working really, really well for you, it would be great if you could make exact copies of yourself, because that means that you have a guarantee that your offspring are going to be exactly like you. And actually, some plants do this on purpose. If plants are growing in an environment that becomes very hostile, very harsh, like maybe it becomes very dry or whatever, some plants have the ability to reproduce only asexually in that situation, and that way they are guaranteed to make more offspring that are exactly the same as them. Because if they're surviving, they have a combination of genes that's working for them. So by making offspring that are the same, the offspring should also survive. If they were to reproduce sexually, the offspring are going to get a new combination. They might not survive as well. And so you're taking a chance. The picture here, this isn't on a test or anything, but sometimes you do have, even in animals, asexual reproduction, something called parthenogenesis, where an unfertilized egg can actually develop into an adult. And so this would be asexual because it would have come from one parent. So, benefits of sexual reproduction. Why would sexual reproduction have arisen in the first place? The benefit of sexual reproduction is that you do get variation. Now, just like asexual reproduction, you might say, well, making offspring that are identical to the parent has a benefit. In some cases, it doesn't. The fact that by creating an offspring that's a combination of two parents gives variation means that there might be an evolutionary advantage. We know that environments change. If every single organism is exactly the same and the environment changes to an environment that now is not beneficial, the entire species would die. But if you've got variety, some organisms with thicker fur, thinner fur, darker fur, lighter fur, and the environment changes, the trees become darker, or the environment becomes drier, or it becomes colder, some of the organisms are possibly going to survive, because you're going to have some organisms, because of this variety, that are better fit to that environment. So new gene combinations can give us benefits. They can give a survival advantage that if the environment changes, it sort of guarantees that the species won't get wiped out completely. Hopefully, it won't get wiped out completely. There are people, for example, that are immune to HIV. They've been exposed. They can see in their bloodstream that they've been exposed to HIV, but for whatever reason, the virus can't survive in them. Imagine if HIV spread through everybody somehow. If nobody was immune, the whole human race would die out. But by having a few people that have this variation, this mutation or whatever, they might carry on the human race. All right, so a few definitions before we move on. I've used the word gene, and you're going to hear that word a lot in the next couple of chapters, but a gene is a DNA code for a specific trait, or a specific protein, I should say. And the way that your genes get passed on is through your gametes, sperm and egg, and when sperm and egg combine, you get a zygote that grows into an organism. The genes are packaged, the DNA is packaged into chromosomes. Remember, you can only actually see those chromosomes when the cell's dividing. The rest of the time, they're sort of loosely coiled as chromatin or chromatin, and you don't actually see those chromosomes. Somatic cells, body cells, remember, have two copies, I should say copies, of each chromosome, not just one. And that makes them 2N or diploid. The chromosomes in a pair are called homologous chromosomes. Now, we make karyotypes, and you remember how you had two copies of chromosome number 1, for example. What do those two chromosomes have in common with each other? They would have had the same band pattern. They would have been the same length. They would have had the centromere in the same place. Are their DNA codes identical? No, their DNA codes are not identical to each other. For example, let's just say that chromosome number 1 carries the genes for blood type. Well, I inherited one copy of chromosome 1 that came from my mom, and I inherited another copy of chromosome 1 that came from my dad. My dad was blood type O, so the code on his chromosome would be for blood type O. The code that I got from my mom was for blood type A. So, are these two chromosomes the same? No. They have information about blood type, but their codes are not the same. Keep in mind, don't mix up a pair of homologous chromosomes with chromatids. The chromatids of a single chromosome are identical to each other. These two chromatids, remember that the cell started as a stick in G1. You can't actually see this, but if you were to coil up the DNA in G1, this is how much DNA there would be. During S, that chromosome made a copy of itself, like this, and now you have the two chromatids. And then G2 happens, and then the purpose of that is that when meiosis happens or mitosis happens, each new cell will get a copy of the information. So the chromatids of one chromosome are identical, but a homologous pair of chromosomes are similar but not identical. They carry genes for the same traits. And remember that a haploid cell would only have one copy of each chromosome. So just to clarify that, this would be, for example, a diploid cell. Chromosome pair number 1, chromosome pair number 2, chromosome pair number 3. This cell would be diploid. The total number of chromosomes in this cell is 6. If this cell undergoes mitosis, all 6 of those chromosomes are going to line up. They're going to split in half, and each new cell that's made at the end of mitosis is still going to have 6 chromosomes, but they're going to be 6 sticks instead of 6 X's. So there are 6 chromosomes here, and there are 6 chromosomes in each of these. When these cells, if these cells go through the cell cycle, when this cell goes through S, its chromosomes will go from being sticks to being X's again. And then when the cell divides into 2, each new cell will get sticks again. So again, I'm hoping that it clarifies for you the difference between chromatids, the two sides of an X. These are not called chromatids anymore. Remember, as soon as that X splits during anaphase and goes to opposite sides, those sticks are now called chromosomes on their own. Just like a baby is a fetus before it's born, and after it comes out, it has now become a baby. These are chromatids, and when the cell splits, those are now chromosomes. So this is not a haploid cell. This is still 2N. A haploid cell is what you would get at the end of meiosis, where one copy of chromosome number 1, and one copy of chromosome number 2, and one copy of chromosome number 3 would go to this sperm, and this would have only 3 chromosomes, which would be the N or haploid number of chromosomes in the cell. And we're going to go over that again later, but I hope that sort of clarifies it, because there's been a lot of confusion the last few days about that. Here's a karyotype showing the homologous pairs. Each of these is an X. This is one chromosome. This is a second chromosome. This is another chromosome. This is another chromosome. So here there are 23 pairs of chromosomes, or 46 total. The diploid number of this cell is 46. If this cell went to make sperm or eggs, the haploid number would be 23, because one copy of chromosome 1, one copy of 2, one copy of 3, one copy of 4, etc., one copy from each pair would go to that sperm or egg cell. So again, the diploid number is what we call it when every chromosome has a partner. That is the diploid number, or 46 in us. Again, not talking about the two sides of an X. We're talking about two separate X's. 22 of them are called autosomes. And that last pair, the 23rd pair, was either XX or XY in the karyotype, if you remember. That is called the sex chromosomes. Now that's a little misleading because that implies that they only determine sex and nothing else. That's not true. The X chromosome in particular has a bunch of other information on it. You cannot live without an X chromosome. You can live without a Y, obviously, because every woman is XX, so she doesn't have a Y. So clearly you can survive without a Y. But you cannot survive without an X. Remember, X0 in our karyotype activity was called Turner syndrome. That person only has one X, and they're missing their other sex chromosome. They can survive. They're female. XY is a male. Even XXY is a male. Pretty much the main thing the Y chromosome does is make you male. This is not a hermaphrodite. This is a male. If there's a Y, they're going to automatically become a male. We'll talk in another chapter about how do you get a hermaphrodite, because it's not because of the X and Y chromosome. It's something a little bit different. There's a little more to it than that. This is again showing the pairs of chromosomes. So 2N for this cell would be 6. There are 6 chromosomes in this cell. They are in pairs. Here is one pair of chromosomes. They're the same size, etc. They're showing them different colors because one came from mom and one came from dad. Here's the second pair. Here's the third pair. If this cell went to make sperm or eggs, it would give one copy from pair number 1, either the blue one or the red one copy from pair number 2, and one copy from pair number 3. One copy of each would go to the offspring, or to the sperm or egg, and that would be N. So for sexual reproduction, every parent donates one copy of each chromosome. And the process that does that cuts the chromosome number in half, is meiosis. The haploid cell that results from meiosis, the gamete is what we call it. It's a sperm and egg in us, but it's just a gamete in some organisms. Has only 23 chromosomes. In us, 22 autosomes, meaning 22 chromosomes that are not a sex chromosome, and then one sex chromosome. If that sex chromosome, if it's a female, then they can only give the X, so the egg would have an X. And if it's a male, they can either give X or Y, and that's why the male determines the sex of the offspring. All organisms that reproduce sexually have meiosis happen at some point in their lifespan, and fertilization happen at some point in their lifespan. When that happens,